here. We only have one drive on my computer, so I'm just going to say that, click OK, and move on. And now I come up with this other thing. Warning, warning, warning. You have selected to remove all Linux partitions and all data on them on the following drives. Are you sure you want to do this? It defaults to no. Just tab over to yes and hit spacebar to select that. And now you can see the partitioning scheme that it's chosen for us. Okay, so here's the /dev/SDA device. So first, before we discuss this, let's just talk about the /dev directory for a couple seconds. So the SDA device, this SCSI disk, is going to house all the various directories of Linux, the /home directory and the /boot directory and all that stuff. But SDA itself is an entry in a directory on the SDA disk, okay? The /dev directory just holds one entry for every single device, every partition, all the various devices on the system have an entry in the /dev directory. And this is just like a placeholder. It just kind of keeps track of some information about the various devices. And SDA holds information about itself, okay? So that might seem kind of confusing at first, but don't worry too much about it. Then you can see here all the various partitions on the SDA disk are listed here. So SDA, remember, is the first SCSI disk. SDA1 is the first partition on the first SCSI disk. SDA2 is the second partition on that disk. SDA3 is the third partition, and so on. Then over here, you can see what is actually on each partition. So you can see here the /boot directory is what's contained in partition 1. And you can also see it's 47 megabytes large. And then the / partition is on partition 2, or the / directory is on partition 2. And the / directory just refers to every directory in the computer except for /boot, because that's been explicitly put into partition 1. And then you can see here the third partition is the swap partition, and that's 509 megabytes large. And we talked about what the swap partition was in the last video. You can also see that everything else in the system, the / directory here, is taking 3,500 megabytes, which is like about 3.5 gigabytes. Okay, so there's our partitioning scheme. If it's okay, you can just select OK and move on. If you want to edit something there, you can do that. If you want to go back and just do the partitioning yourself, if you decided after you see this you don't like it and you want to do it yourself, you can hit back and go back and do it yourself. All right, so there's the partitioning scheme that we're going to use. I'm just going to click OK and move on. The next question it asks us is, which bootloader would you like to use? The default bootloader for Red Hat is the GRUB bootloader, which just stands for the Grand Unified Bootloader. That's a good acronym. And this is the default for Red Hat. That works perfectly well. You could also use Lilo as your bootloader. We're going to talk about Lilo in a later video, but for right now I'm just going to use GRUB and move on here. Then it says, where do you want to install the bootloader? One choice is the master boot record. If you're just booting Linux on your system, if that's the only operating system on your computer, then the master boot record's the place to put it. If you're going to dual boot various operating systems, then you can put it in the first sector of the boot partition, and when you turn on your computer, you'll have a choice of what operating system you boot. And then if you choose Linux, then it's going to go to the first sector of the boot partition and boot from there. The next option is a very advanced option. It's the Bootloader Configuration option. Here what you can do is, if you need to pass special options to the kernel, you can write them here, and you know, then they'll be executed when the system boots up. Like I said, this is a very advanced option. I'm just going to leave all this stuff blank and hit OK and move on. And now we've got our bootloader configuration screen. Basically, if you have multiple operating systems, you can list them out here, so then when your system starts up, you can choose between any of these operating systems to boot. We just have Linux on this computer, so I'm just going to hit OK again and move on. And now another option is to use a password for the bootloader. So here, if you want to use a GRUB password, and the only time you do this is in some sort of high security situation. Because if you don't have a GRUB password, what can happen is, you know, somebody could, a very knowledgeable person could reboot your system, try and like pass some certain options to the kernel to then gain access to your computer as like a root user. Okay, so if you want to prevent that, select this by hitting the space bar to use a GRUB password, type in the bootloader password, and then type it in again to confirm it. And then the next screen is network configuration. We're going to talk all about configuring a network in some later video. If you know what you're doing here, you can fill this in. Basically, there's two choices. There's either a dynamic configuration or a static configuration. A dynamic configuration is the case when your ISP doesn't give you a static IP address. You get a different IP address every time you log on to the network. Okay, if that's the case, then you star this. If that's not the case, then if you actually do have a static IP address, you can write the static IP address here, write your subnet mask here, write your default gateway here, and your name servers here. All right, but like I said, we're going to talk all about network configuration 5 videos down the road or so. And the next option is a firewall configuration. All right, so just think of this firewall visually. Like, what's a firewall? It's a wall that's on fire, right? Okay, so if you had a firewall around your house, it would be very hard for people to get into your house. And the same's true of your computer. If you have a firewall on your computer, you can set up various levels here, either no firewall, medium, or high. And in that case, it just restricts the access to your computer over the network. If you're running a server or something and you have a high degree of firewall, then what's going to happen is it's going to be hard for people to gain access to your servers. And maybe that's what you want. Maybe you only want a select group of people to be able to gain access to your server, and in that case you can configure it just so those people have access to your server. So this is, again, for high security systems, you should choose high. For regular systems, just choose medium, and that'll work perfectly fine for most instances. The next screen here says language support, so if you speak some other language, you can choose that here. I just speak English, so I'm just going to leave that alone, but if you speak Estonian or something, you can choose that. Again, you're just going to have the option of seeing various options in Linux in different languages then if you pick that. Next, it says what time zone are you located in. You can choose to set your hardware clock to Greenwich Mean Time. That would kind of drive me nuts, I think. I'd always have to be converting, trying to remember how far off from Greenwich Mean Time I am. Instead, I'm just going to scroll down the list here, and I get to America, Vancouver. So America is North and South America. When you see a city that you think is in your time zone, and Vancouver, British Columbia is in my time zone here in Seattle, so I'm just going to pick that one. And the next screen is asking us to pick a root password. The root password is essential for system security. Since the root account has all the privileges on the system, you don't want somebody to be able to get into that account. So pick a root password that's going to be really, really hard to guess. Upper and lowercase letters should be in the root password. Some symbols, like an exclamation mark, should be in there. Or numbers should be in there. Okay, and it should just be really, really hard to guess for a normal person, and also for password guessing programs that are out there. There's password guessing programs that go through every word in the dictionary and mix the letters around. They put capital letters in there and stuff. So it should just be really hard to guess. It should have some numbers and symbols in there, like I said. What some people do is they take two words. They take the beginning of one word and the end of the other word. And then they turn letters like L's into the number 1 or an exclamation mark or something. They turn A's into the @ sign that we always use in emails. Okay? So just to mix it up, to make it hard for some automatic program to guess it. So I'm going to fill in these fields. I'm going to type in my password, and I'm going to type it in again to confirm it. And you can see here that it's just all stars. So somebody looking over my shoulder wouldn't be able to tell what I just typed in. And I'm going to select OK to move forward. And now it's asking us to add a normal user account. You can log in as the root user, but you should always have a normal user account that you do most of your normal day-to-day stuff on. You send email and browse the web as your normal user account. Even if this is your own personal system, you should have a normal user account to do that day-to-day stuff. So I'm going to fill these fields in, and you can see here I've given myself a user ID of Perry, I've given myself a password, and I typed it in again to confirm it, and then I just typed my full name. Okay, so there's the information that needs to create a user account. I'm going to select OK to move forward. And now this is the user account setup page. It tells me what accounts I've added already. If I want to add more accounts, I can select Add here, but I'll show you how to add more accounts later when we talk about user administration in Linux. You'll be able to add all the accounts that you want to. For right now, I'm just going to select OK to move forward. And now this page is all about authentication configuration. The first two things here have been selected by Red Hat already. Use shadow passwords and enable MD5 passwords. We'll talk about this more when we talk about user administration, but for right now, let me just tell you that shadow passwords, what that means is that the passwords are going to be stored in a separate file all by themselves. And enable MD5 password says that those passwords that are stored in the shadow file are encrypted by the MD5 hash function. And the MD5 hash function is just a way to encrypt passwords that's proven to be really, really solid. Even if I showed you the encrypted password, you wouldn't be able to decrypt it. Even if you had the most powerful computers in the world on your side, it would take you years and years and years to decrypt that password. And hopefully by that time somebody's changed the password. So your decryption won't do any good anyway. Okay? So that just adds an extra level of security to regular systems. Now this stuff down here adds extra levels of security to network systems. So if you're in some office or some organization where you have lots of Linux computers all networked together, that's where these things come into play. NIS is the name information server. Basically, this allows someone to sit at any computer in the organization, sit down, type their username and their password, and it's just going to look like they're at their normal computer. Everything's going to kind of be the same. They're going to be using the same username, the same password. They're going to have the same files available to them, that kind of stuff. LDAP